Welcome to Risky Conversations. My name is Jamie Lee. I'm an executive coach for smart women who don't like office politics, and I help them get promoted, get better paid without throwing anyone under the bus. And how? I support them in having some risky conversations. And everything that's worthwhile is on the other side of a risky conversation. I'm really excited to have my sister from another mother, my colleague SD Shanti, Dr. SD Shanti. She began her career as a pediatric and dentist and public health specialist. I mean, talk about overachiever. Pediatric, dentist, and public health specialist in academia. From there, she went on to get a PhD in clinical psychology and ended up working to address the global epidemics of violence and depression. Yes, we still are having those global epidemics right now. Violence affects one in every three women and one in every two children in countless men and youth. After facing experts who are pessimistic about change, Dr. S.T. Shanti she was inspired to develop innovations in violence prevention, which were incubated at Stanford University and have been peer-reviewed, including by the Violence Prevention Alliance of the World Health Organization. She's developed a cost-effective, research-based methods to prevent violence, which affects over 1 billion people. She founded the World Love Forum, is now gearing up to launch a global campaign to prevent violence through the implementation of love within homes, schools, workplaces, media, and community. This is a very ambitious project, Dr. SD Shanti. I'm really, really privileged and honored to have you on the podcast. I mean, to talk about how to prevent violence in our world, uh, that takes guts. That takes big guts. So I'm really excited to hear all about the World Love Forum. But um, first, here's the question I ask everyone who come onto the podcast. What was one of the riskiest conversations you've engaged in, and why was it worth it?
Thank you so much, Jamie, for your warm welcome. It's a delight to be here with you. And, it's interesting. You were talking about ambition. Maybe it's more just discontent with the status quo. That's the thing. If I were more zen in life, I probably would be more accepting of things. But it bothers me that there is so much that we don't have to accept in the world that especially things that are preventable forms of suffering. So to your question, which I really appreciate because it gave me a chance to reflect, I realized probably one of the most pivotal, risky conversations I had was with myself. And it was a moment when I was working on a child as a pediatric dentist. And at that point, I was already a dual specialist, and in pediatric dentistry and dental public health, which technically means you had all these tools and means at your disposal to help address problems. And there was this insight in the middle of this moment with the child's, crying and the drill and noise and all this. And I thought to myself, am I going to do this the same thing for the next 30, 40 years? Or where is there a better way? There's got to be a better way. And that's, there I was with all these credentials and skills actually but I thought it's not enough. There has to be more to solving this problem. And so probably the riskiest thing I've ever done, it's a repeated theme, is it's in psychology that I have found the most creative work. And dentistry always represents security, it's steady job. And you mentioned, we might be sisters from a different mother. And I mean, also coming from an immigrant background, I mean, I had relatives who were a little bit freaked out, like calling me saying, why are you giving up your job as a professor to go be a grad student? You're crazy, you're this, you're that. And so I think that moment really stands out for me because I was so filled with discontent. And I just thought yeah, and had I stayed in that path, I would have made a lot more money. I made tons more money. But I just felt there's a better way to address suffering in the world. And so I just left. I have repeatedly left known things in pursuit of something better in the unknown.
Mm. Which is very Zen, right? In Zen, we learn that, like all things, even who we really are, ultimately unknown. But I'm fascinated because you were a pediatric dentist, you're a professor, you were making high income, and then you pivoted to become a graduate student in psychology. Is that right? Did I follow this
Yep,
correctly?
yep, yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the risk. You were like, there's something more, something bigger that I am meant to work towards, or a bigger purpose that I want to serve.
I hadn't thought of it quite that way. I couldn't stand giving kids shots. I couldn't stand seeing problems that were preventable. I was seeing kids, we would see kids with advanced dental decay, with abscesses. I mean, there's a severe form of dental disease that young children get where, several teeth are rotten and sometimes it causes abscesses, infection. These children have to be seen in the operating room under general anesthesia. It still goes on today, but I um I just thought, why? Why is it like this?
Hmm.
Why can't it be better? And I think that as I think about it, one of the things that really grabbed me in terms of psychology was this question of what makes parents or anyone do something even when they know better. So that I think as a point of inquiry, that's one of the things that guided me. That, a lot of times we know what needs to be done for ourselves, right? We all have to exercise, maybe get more sleep, drink less coffee,
Eat
etc.
less candy, brush your teeth, floss.
Right. Speaking from my own goals are to reduce my coffee intake, and so but we all know what we should be doing.
Mm,
But the challenge lies in doing that. And so I was looking for answers to these questions in psychology, and that's where I found them. And one thing has led, it's like a one thing led to another, which I never could have predicted, really. All I wanted was to just go back, go get my PhD, go back to a dental school and be a professor and have a normal life, which has not happened at all. So,
maybe you can retrace the steps for us. So you were a pediatric dentist, and then you were a grad student in psychology.
yeah.
And what were the steps that led you to World Love Forum? And, I also want to hear more about World Love Forum.
Thank you. So, the PhD program I went to, I got into like two or three places, and the one I chose was historically a pioneer in prevention and mental health. And,
Mm,
at that point, I already had a master's in public health. So, for me, it was very exciting even to enter psychology
mm,
with this idea of prevention. And I had a unique trio. So it was this professor who was a pioneer in prevention, and then there was a woman professor who introduced me to feminist psychology, women's mental health issues, all the issues around gender and women's mental health. And then I had another professor who was very much into family psychology and
mm.
children. So there was this wonderful cluster there that led me to, I went to the University of Vermont, and I was already primed with all of these things. So first, because of already having a master's in public health, I'd worked in inner city health centers and in health, health centers I would work part-time as a clinician, as a dentist, and that brought me in the trenches, if you will, outside of academia, right? In the, face to face with people experiencing problems. And I had seen quite a lot already. And so interestingly, I when I entered psychology, it was like, wow, I found a treasure trove of answers to these problems. And shortly after I got my PhD, I had moved to Switzerland at the time. I was at University of Basel. The World Health Organization and Harvard School of Public Health, I believe, came out with what was called the Global Burden of Disease Report in 1997 that said depression was already a leading cause of disability for women
Mm,
around the world at that time. And so for me, coming from this prevention background, uh, I just went, whoa, what is this? That was for me, it was like, oh my God. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was this bad. And
mm,
they said also that depression would be a major issue for men also in the years to come. And so immediately, as soon as I heard that, I thought to myself, what are we going to do? What can we do? For me, it felt like a giant wave hitting the population, and we're already in it. And the thing I learned from my professor, my former professor, Esther Rothblum, who coincidentally, I'm in San Francisco and she's retired and she's in San Francisco too. So in fact, I'm seeing her tomorrow for lunch. But she had really opened my eyes to the whole literature around women's experiences. And I thought to myself, we've got to do something. We've just got to do something. And one thing led to another. It's never a straight, clean line, and it was a zigzag. And one of the themes I encountered after that around that time was how there's a gap between quality research-based information and stuff that the public receives or doesn't receive. So one of the big gaps in the world in my field in public health, mental health is the gap between what we know about prevention of problems and the application of that, the widespread application. So I became very interested in what would be called health information dissemination or translation of science into practice. So these are ongoing themes since then. And a little while after the global data on depression came out for women, the UN published a report that said violence affects one in every three women around the world. And again, my jaw dropped because we all know violence is a problem. I mean, you've got to be living in a cave or something if you don't know that, right? But the numbers were so stark to me. And I've worked with clients who are affected, I have relatives and so on. And, it's something we all know about in our lives, unfortunately. But it was so stark, the idea that it's one in three. And sometime after that, the WHO also came out with data that violence affects one in every two children. So for me, both of these reports, the first one on depression and the one on violence, were points of no return. And it's literally like leaping off a cliff each time. And I have no parachute. I mean, I have to try to build a parachute as it's, as I'm flying or dropping or whatever, or leaping off the cliff. So and so one thing I would say about this to share with your listeners is a lot of times something speaks to us inside. And I would encourage people to listen to that with an open mind. And it's so easy for everyone around us to dissuade us and talk us out of it using logic. I mean, people come from a place of love. They're worried, they're scared, whatever. So for somebody among your listeners, it might be music, it might be art, it might be literature, or it might be something else. So it doesn't have to be, becoming a peace activist or something. But I really invite people to listen in to what is I call it the compass of your heart. And and it's not easy, but then not following it is also not easy. So it's like choosing, the lesser of the two. And if any of your listeners ever want to just reach out, they're happy to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to just be a sounding board and cheering. What do you call it? Like a cheering squad for whoever, and it's not always going to make financial sense. I am financially nowhere near where I could have been, but
Can I
as a,
ask you a question
yeah,
about what you said earlier? So,
yeah,
um, so violence affects 1 in 3 women,
yeah,
and it affects 1 in 2 children. So every other child is impacted by violence.
yes,
And what kind of violence is this
yeah,
violence that the
yeah.
report was alluding to?
So with women, according to the UN, there are about at least 15 kinds of violence, but the
Mm,
most frequent ones are physical assault, for instance, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, bride kidnapping is something that still goes on today in certain cultures.
yeah.
Uh, breast ironing, there are all these kind of also cultural practices. Female genital mutilation, some people would say, is part of people's culture, but others would argue there's no medical reason for it and it poses risk.
Mm,
Human trafficking also is a huge problem. At the moment, according to the International Labor Organization, there are I think over 26 million people
hmm.
who are currently experiencing human trafficking. So that's huge. And then apropos of the WHO and child maltreatment and violence. So this particular study had looked at in the last 12 months of the study or something. They said at any given time in a year.
Mm,
So there's physical with children, there's physical violence, there's neglect or maltreatment, and then there's also psychological violence, which, some people will say sticks and stones can't hurt, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words don't hurt me at all.
mm,
But in fact, we know that words can damage children. It has a major impact on people's development and lifelong. This is how, when we talk about internalized messaging and so on, that of lack of feeling worth, or we see kids evaluated for their looks or something, and somebody will say something, and that's really a milder thing. But there are a hell of a lot of kids in the world who are physically hit,
right.
spanked, and again, we come to a cultural thing where so there's the extreme form of violence. Like the first case I ever had to file was a child who's the report I had to file was a kid who had burn marks on their forearm,
Mm,
and it was from an iron, like a hot iron. So people do all kinds of nasty things to children. Um, there's that all the way to, consistently negative speech that's undermining, it's harsh. And right now, corporal punishment has been outlawed in some places.
mhm.
And there are a lot of data that show that corporal punishment harms children long term. So what we want to do is shift from that kind of upbringing to more, to alternative ways of disciplining children and teaching children how to grow into the world. And I just wanted to finish early. I want to say, like, so my wealth for having deviated or followed this path, my wealth is really in something else. And, at the moment, it's, again, that's part of following your heart, I think, is for your listeners to recognize there are other currencies. And yes, money is important, but there are other currencies in life as well, like love or satisfaction or feeling like have you lived out your utmost gifts, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's something to consider also.
And that makes sense because so much of the violence that we do see in our world are motivated by money, by material wealth, by greed, by me needing to have more than you, and that gender-based violence has been happening for millennia. I come from South Korea, where my mother experienced some domestic violence from her uh, her husband's family because she only had three daughters. And so that was considered like, a kind of a sin because she didn't bear any sons in a patrilineal society where all the wealth goes to the boys. So yeah, this really hits home that, and it makes sense that for you, it's something beyond money, something beyond, dollar currencies that motivate you to do the work that you do. And it also makes sense that in psychology, you've found the connection between all the violence, all the different 15, you said 15 different forms of violence that women and children get confronted or faced with leads to psychological illness, including depression. And so, talk to us about the solution that the World Love Forum offers. Like, what are the tangible solutions that you're offering as an antidote to this epidemic of violence and depression?
Thank you. And, and also the experience you shared in your family of origin
Mm,
about girls, that's the same thing. My roots are in India. And,
mm,
this is an age-old thing where daughter-in-laws are blamed. And
right.
when in fact, it's the male sperm that determines the gender of the child, right? And so, which is a little bit ironic and sad. So, yeah, there are two. Um, one of the gaps that we are aiming to fill is in skills training and bringing these, what if I may use the word behavioral vaccine or skills training,
Mm,
uh, to millions of people. And so think of it like hand washing, toothbrushing, driver's education for relationships, or tooth hand washing, mental hygiene. We have hand hygiene, right? We need to have mental hygiene. And so what I talk about is a trio of hope. There is love, emotion regulation, or brush your mind, and violence prevention. They go together, and they're interconnected. So, in fact, right now, like this week, I'm launching the next step, which is the global scaling. And I have a framework I developed while I was at Stanford called Blueprint for Hope, and it talks about what are the three things we must do and how to do them in terms of bridging this gap. And so, some of the key features of that work and in my portfolio are one is entertainment education. And so, this is it's a science-based way to bring information and behavior change to millions of people through soap operas, for instance. And so the proof of concept that I had done in Ethiopia earlier, it was funded by UNICEF and reached 20 million people. So typically, what we might do is, offer couple skills training to couples through a workshop, but it's limited in terms of how many people we can reach, or people may not enroll, they don't have money, there's so many barriers. So what I did instead was teach these skills for conflict de-escalation, for instance, because
mm,
that's one of the ways couples end up in violence, is because they fight over money and financial stressors and other, in-laws, kids, all these things. And so that's just one example of a skill that I taught the script writers and producers. And they, in turn, had their characters carry out these behaviors. And so this is a way you can model for large numbers of people alternatives to violence. So, and two things happen when we do that through mass media. So one is that you are role modeling for people. You're showing them what can be done. And when we do it on a large enough number, we are shifting harmful cultural norms. So, for instance, there is history of doing soap operas or serial drama, that's the technical name for soap opera, in China, where, also historically there has been devaluation of girl children. And so this is something where they had dramas where, the main character has raises a girl and so on. And in India, also in the 70s, there was a drama that was made, a soap opera, where it showed, women's empowerment. Like, or in South America, dramas have shown women buying a sewing machine and opening their own business as a tailor. And after that, sales of sewing machines went up. But these are ways of reaching large numbers of people with self-empowerment techniques, psychological techniques. And then the other part, one of the other features or in my blueprint for hope is the focus on women and women as not only beneficiaries of social change, but also women to empower women as agents of social change. And this is based on a meta-analysis, a large study done by a professor at UCLA. His name is K-A-R. And what he showed is that women and women's groups around the world successfully carry out health promotion efforts regardless of whether they are in rich countries or poor countries. And so when I was doing the early stages of my formative research, there were all these famous people at famous institutions who were so negative towards the whole thing and very pessimistic, saying things like, why do you even bother? I mean, these are like well-resourced people at famous places going in private, looking at me going, why do you even bother? It's hopeless. And I was like, no. I said, how long do you watch people cry in your office? I was a therapist already. And I said, how long do you watch people cry when you know prevention is possible? But this Professor Carr, when I reached out to him, he wrote me. We had some exchanges. I've had exchanges with all these people, and he said, you are correct in focusing on women. And so that is one of the things I'm working on is to teach prevention to, my first goal is 1 million women and reach 1 billion through entertainment. And then after that, reach 200 million women. And, imagine if millions of people know the basics of prevention, they can implement it in their own spheres of influence, in their countries. We can show people how to advocate for policy, for instance, or how to start putting things in entertainment, how to be a collective force for good. And these things are not just to benefit women, it benefits everybody. That's the idea. And where love comes in is it's the highest good, it's our highest common denominator. And that's what everyone longs for. And when we promote love in the world, we automatically reduce violence. It just it goes together, which Buddha said that long ago, thousands of years ago, about hate and about and it's proven by modern neuroscience and psychology. So yeah, so that's where things are. And
You remind me when I was first getting started as a coach for women, focusing on professional women,
uh,
one of the most motivating stats that I encountered. So this was like, I don't know, more than 10 years ago. The Clinton Global Initiative put out research saying that when women around the world, so not just in developed countries, but in developing countries, when women earn money, when they have resources, they in 91% of them invested back into their communities and families. And as for men, it was much lower. I forget exactly what it was like. I don't know. It was like half
yep.
or less, right? So when I read that, it really brought home the point for me, watching my mother, who, ended up after immigrating to America, getting divorced and raising three daughters by herself, speaking broken English,
Mhm.
right? After she have survived domestic violence, her just like thriving as this solopreneur. I mean, she hustled. She still does. She's a hustler, you know. But, seeing that she was able to benefit us and we're able to be, productive members of society and go to college and it's just like I had a direct experience of what a single woman can do when she is no longer under the thumb of violence. Um, and yeah, and there's a lot of tough love, right? When you're a mother or a maternal figure, you don't even have to have your own children to, to be in touch with that loving compassion, as the Buddhist people would say. Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about self-compassion, because I think that sort of is at the heart, right, of not just what all the major religions preach, including the Buddha, but also what real true love, self-love starts with, right? And so maybe um I'd love to really hear like specific examples of some of these techniques that you espouse, that you try to, share with the millions and hundreds of millions of women. Like I would love to hear like a specific example of a technique or a tool that would help, a person be in touch or to cultivate self-compassion.
Thank you. So, if I may, just I want to acknowledge your mother as
Yeah, she's really
the
cool.
profound figure of resilience. I mean, and now I understand more about where you get your fire and spark from. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so broadly speaking, we can think of self-compassion as coming under the overarching umbrella of self-regulation or managing our emotions, emotion regulation, managing our behaviors. And again, as with other areas, elements from our thousands of year old, our indigenous psychology has been studied in the West and, backed up and proven by Western science. And so self-regulation has been hugely, excuse me, self-compassion has been hugely studied. And the leading names, the researchers are Kristen Neff. She's the expert. She's, practically synonymous with that. And also there's Christopher Germer and Paul Gilbert, I believe, in England. And so this is a three-part practice where, and so, excuse me, let me back up and say there's tender self-compassion, and now she has also evolved to, over the years, has added fierce self-compassion. So we can think of tender self-compassion as nurturing. It's a very nurturing, kind of gentle, soft kind of thing. Fierce self-compassion is like a mama bear defending the cub, which is so important for, especially for women, or women sometimes we confront issues in society and so on. And so I'll start with tender self-compassion, and we can think of that as talking to ourselves as we would talk to a best friend, because a lot of times, for whatever reason, we have internalized messages about performance, or, who we are, what we are, as we're children. A lot of times we're evaluated by performance rather than just because we exist, kind of thing. So this is a good antidote for any such issues. And so the first thing is just to accept the situation. So that's where mindfulness comes in. And I talk about it like almost like put the issue in a basket in front of you and just let it be, and acknowledge that it's there. And then this, and sort of, I talk also about breathe into it and just settle with it, just it's there. So say I hurt my foot, I'll just use something trivial, I stubbed my toe. And that's a good place to start before going to really, really more complicated, higher order difficulties. And then, so you just kind of let it sit there and accept it. Then we connect with humanity and say, this is something that many people experience. I am not alone in this, or these kinds of injuries, or job loss, or illness, whatever happens, or discrimination happens. So that's the second part. And then the third part is extending good wishes, compassion to oneself. And with positive statements like, may I be well, may I be healthy, may I be happy, may I be patient, and people can customize whatever they need to hear, whatever, whatever would serve them well in that regard. And again, you know, um, Jamie, I've noticed working with people, with clients and so on, and workshops, I also do workshops and so on. It's so much easier for people to come up with things to comfort their friend, to affirm their friend, comfort their friend. And so what I just like to say is talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend, and you can do it. You're on the path. May you be well, and so on. And interestingly, then work by Christopher Germer has now found that it's also helpful for reducing shame, which is something, I think men and women experience in society as we're growing up. I mean, so perhaps some more than others. And I'm not sure if girls experience more shame than boys, but I know, like in my Indian culture of origin, it's just such a part of how you give feedback to people. Like, why didn't you do this? Or what's
Oh,
wrong?
Koreans are just
Yeah.
like that too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, you know, I mean, it could be something absolutely simple. Like I was a guest at somebody's house, this was like 30 years ago, and I offered to chop vegetables and to help. My friend was cooking. My friend's mother looked at me and said, "Where did you learn to cut these vegetables? Didn't your mother teach you anything?" And I was like, oh my God, but this is like, that's just everyday talk for
Right.
people.
Yes.
And, but in fact, speaking of mothers, I would like to acknowledge it was my mother who, at the age of 14, like I wanted makeup, she gave me Thoreau. She made me read Henry David Thoreau. So, so I think, but shame, and even today in marketing, for example, a lot of marketing, especially toward women, is targeted around making us feel inadequate. Your
Right.
thighs are too big, your skin is the wrong color, skin lightening cream. Oh, if you're too pale, you got to get dark. If you're dark, you got to get light. I mean, there's like nobody is good as they are, right? And so these are all examples of where shame can creep into our lives, even unknowingly. And so self-compassion, the tender self-compassion is a way to continually nourish ourselves, if you will. And then the fierce self-compassion has to do with drawing limits. Because again, a lot of us were raised with this idea, you have to be polite and you have to be a good girl and pleasant, right? And what is pleasant? Standing up for yourself, even if you do it pleasantly, for some people, they're going to interpret it as you're just disagreeable.
Hmm.
So, we this fierce self-compassion is about acknowledging that we have a right to be as we are without having people push us around and sort of set boundaries. So for instance, if somebody is dealing with toxic workplaces, which according to, the American Psychological Association affects 20% of the workforce in the US, and according to the International Labor Organization, affects 20% of the workforce around the world, which is like over 700 million people or something. And so fierce self-compassion is a way to address that while also working with many other things. That you don't have to take what's given to you. You can set boundaries. You can talk about mental shields, or I talk about build a moat or build a shield or a fence so that you're not taking it in, and be your ally and stand up.
Advocate and advocate for
Yes,
yourself.
yes, advocate. Thank you. And stand up for yourself, right? And
Yeah.
so those are examples of fierce self-compassion for me in action. And coming from a place of love, we don't have to be angry. We can wish the other person, kind of like, I wish you well, but this is not for me. There's a saying in Switzerland, you don't have to, in Swiss German, I learned it, you don't have to drink the soup as hot as it's served. So, they may dish it out, but this is where fierce self-compassion can help us in the workplace, where we set limits. And then these are all things that help us with our emotional health. It's part of our emotional, it's like it's something we can do as part of our mental hygiene practices also. And there's also research that shows that self-compassion can help people reduce the risk of burnout, especially like for healthcare workers and so on. So that's a very multi-purpose tool with its origins ostensibly in the East, in Eastern philosophy. So
In fact, the part where you said, "May I be well, may I be
yeah,
happy, may I be
yes.
safe,"
Uh-huh.
I started attending a Zen meditation center, and every meditation session we end with that loving kindness prayer.
Yeah.
I've also heard it described as metta meditation,
Yeah.
right? And wishing well of other people and extending that loving kindness outward to the world. So we end the meditation session with, may everyone, may all beings in the world be happy. May all beings be safe. May they all have peace. And the first time I said the prayer, I was like, I really felt it was like I felt something direct in my heart. And,
Yes.
a
Yeah.
lot of ambitious, smart women who might listen to this, they might be like, self-compassion? I don't know. I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. I gotta go check off another thing on my to-do list.
Mhm.
And often when, clients seek out a therapist like you once were, or when they seek out a coach like me, people are often feeling very stuck,
Mhm.
very stressed, or burnt out, or just frustrated. Like they just seem like they can't move forward in a way. And almost always, self-compassion is the antidote
Mhm.
to that stuck feeling. And once you give yourself some self-compassion, and that it becomes fierce self-compassion, that's when compassion, takes action. I think that's when the self-advocacy is something that, something that is like purposeful, but also something that heals.
Yes, thank you. And as you were talking, I want to share what came to mind. We can think of it as concentric circles of love
Mm,
and wishing well. In the East, we don't always say "I love you," but that doesn't mean we don't love one another.
mm,
And I once had a grad student from Korea, and we were talking. It was like, "Yeah, my mom never said I love you," and we were.
mm,
It's just not there in certain cultures. It's not a cultural norm, nor in India historically. It's not,
mm.
but we can think of wishing well. I wish you well, and we start with ourselves and extend it to everybody. And you were talking about people, your listeners, for instance, in the workplace. So there is a Center for Compassionate Leadership out of New York. I highly recommend people check it out. I have taken courses there, and they are focused on introducing or infusing compassion in the workplace, which to me is one of the antidotes to toxic workplace. And recently they have been having discussions about self-compassion, and I believe there's research that shows that when a leader has self-compassion for themselves in an organization, like higher levels of self-compassion are associated with better styles of leadership versus, being a taskmaster, for instance, and harsh. And that's something too that, in the business world, some people think, or even with raising children, there's the saying, raise the rod, spoil, what is it? No, spare the rod, spoil the child, or something like that, or being harsh in the workplace. Being tough is going to bring results. But the fact is that kindness, compassion, softness. These are all things that create neurological safety for us, which I know you talk about in your work as well. And that is where our ultimate strength lies. So yeah, so thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you.
Where can people go to learn more about you and World Love Forum?
Any of your listeners are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's SD Shanti San Francisco, and also just worldloveforum.org. And it's right now a small website on Substack. It's a newsletter, but we're in the process of, launching now the next phase, so they can subscribe there and keep in touch. So
Excellent. And I will link to all those uh, pr- uh, I will link all of that in the show notes so people can find it.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you so much for your time, Shanti.
my pleasure. And thank you, Jamie. It's truly a delight. And yeah, we'll see what lies ahead.
All right, talk soon.
All right.